Love is often portrayed as a bond so strong it can withstand anything, a force that can conquer all. But what happens when love is built on secrets and lies? In this story, a wedding, a symbol of a fresh start, and a new life together unfolds into a nightmare of betrayal and bloodshed. Set against the backdrop of a quiet, upscale neighborhood, this tragic tale unravels behind the walls of what should have been a perfect wedding. Joy and anticipation mask the dark secrets waiting to be revealed. This is the story of Derek, Leah, and Taryn, three people whose lives are about to be forever changed by the choices they've made and the truths they've hidden. Our story centers on three individuals: Leah, the beautiful bride; Derek, her devoted groom; and Taryn, his best friend. Their lives are intertwined by fate and friendship, but beneath the surface of this close-knit bond lies a hidden truth. Derek and Taryn share a connection far deeper than anyone knows, a connection that threatens to unravel everything on this fateful night. As Derek stands at the altar, he is torn between the life he is about to commit to with Leah and the secret life he has been living with Taryn. This secret, once revealed, will shatter everything in its wake. Every story has a beginning, a place where bonds are formed, secrets are kept, and lives intertwine. For Derek and Taryn, it began with friendship, one that stretched through years of shared experiences, laughter, and unspoken understanding. Derek and Taryn were more than just companions; they were each other's confidants, allies in a world that often felt too large to face alone. From the outside, their relationship seemed like any other: close, supportive, unwavering. But beneath the surface, there was something more. Something neither could fully acknowledge, let alone reveal. As the years passed, their bond grew stronger, inseparable. They were the kind of friends who could finish each other's sentences, who understood each other's thoughts without a word being spoken. When Leah entered the picture, she was welcomed into their tight-knit circle. She saw two men who cared deeply for each other and was drawn to their closeness, believing it was a sign of Derek's capacity for love and loyalty. But what she didn't see, what she couldn't see, were the moments between Derek and Taryn. A glance, a touch, a word that carried a weight Leah would never understand. As the wedding day approached, Derek found himself struggling with an anxiety he couldn't shake. He loved Leah, truly, but there was something else, something lurking in the shadows, waiting to be confronted. Taryn saw it too: the way Derek's smile no longer reached his eyes, the way his laughter seemed forced, hollow. Leah, in her happiness, was blissfully unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. But to understand the true depth of this story, we must go back to a time before the engagement, before the wedding preparations, to a moment when everything changed. It was a night like any other, or so it seemed. Derek and Taryn were alone, as they often were, sharing a quiet evening after a long day. But something was different this time. Something unspoken hung in the air between them. It had always been there, this tension, this unacknowledged connection, but they had never dared to cross that line. Yet, on this night they did. A glance lingered a moment too long. A hand brushed against a shoulder with more intent than usual. And suddenly the boundary that had kept them safe, that had kept their relationship simple, was shattered. What followed was a night of confusion, passion, and fear. They were no longer just friends. They had become something else, something they couldn't easily define, and something they knew they could never reveal. In the days and weeks that followed, they kept their secret buried deep, hidden from the world and from Leah. But with every stolen moment, every secret meeting, the weight of their deception grew heavier. Derek was torn between two worlds: the life he had always known, the life he was expected to live, and the life he had glimpsed, one filled with a love that was as terrifying as it was consuming. Taryn felt it too: the dread of what they had done, and the even greater dread of what would happen if the truth ever came to light. As the wedding day drew nearer, the tension between Derek and Taryn became impossible to ignore. They tried to act as if nothing had changed, as if their relationship was the same as it had always been. But they both knew it wasn't. Derek's behavior became erratic, his mood swinging wildly from joy to despair, from excitement to fear. He threw himself into the wedding preparations with a fervor that surprised everyone. But those closest to him could see the cracks beginning to form. Taryn, meanwhile, was a picture of calm on the outside, but inside he was a storm of emotions: love, guilt, jealousy, and an overwhelming sense of loss. Leah, in her blissful ignorance, focused on the wedding details: the dress, the flowers, the guest list. She was filled with excitement, dreaming of the life she was about to begin with the man she loved. She didn't see the way Derek would stare off into the distance when he thought no one was watching. Didn't notice how his hands would tremble slightly when he spoke of the future. She couldn't understand the way he would sometimes pull away from her touch, as if he were afraid of something or someone. And then there were the moments between Derek and Taryn. Moments that were almost imperceptible but spoke volumes: a glance held a fraction too long, a hand lingering on a shoulder, a whisper shared in the quiet of a crowded room. These moments were brief, fleeting, but enough to stir unease in those who noticed them. Taryn struggled too, caught between his love for Derek and his fear of what was to come. He knew the wedding would change everything, knew that once the vows were spoken, their relationship, whatever it had become, would have to end. The closer they got to the wedding day, the more the tension grew. Derek found himself waking up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, his heart pounding in his chest. He would lie there, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with thoughts of what he was about to do and what he was about to lose. Taryn was a constant presence in his life, yet there was a distance between them that hadn't been there before, a distance created by fear, guilt, and the knowledge that the life they had known was about to be torn apart. And so, with every passing day, the suspense built, the tension between Derek and Taryn becoming more and more unbearable. The wedding day loomed on the horizon like a storm cloud, dark and ominous, threatening to destroy everything in its path. Derek was caught in a web of his own making, and he knew that no matter which path he chose, someone was going to get hurt. He just didn't know how much. The day of the wedding, a day that was supposed to be filled with joy and celebration, had finally arrived. Derek stood at the altar, but instead of excitement, his heart pounded with overwhelming anxiety. Watching Leah walk down the aisle, each step felt like another nail in the coffin of the life he thought he should be living. Taryn was just a few feet away, standing as Derek's best man, a role he had fulfilled for years in more ways than one. But today the weight of that title felt unbearable. As Derek recited his vows, his mind raced. The words felt hollow, lacking any real meaning. He stole a glance at Taryn, who forced a smile, but Derek could see the pain behind his eyes, the silent battle Taryn fought while watching the man he loved marry someone else. The ceremony went on as expected. Vows were exchanged, rings were slipped onto fingers, and the couple was pronounced husband and wife. But for Derek, every moment felt like a reminder of the love he was hiding and the truth he could never openly share. At the reception, the atmosphere was jubilant, but Derek was far from it. Inside, his mind churned with a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, torn between the life he had just vowed to Leah and the growing connection with Taryn. Leah, glowing with happiness, was unaware of the turmoil brewing inside her new husband. But as the night wore on, even she noticed Derek's distant demeanor, his smiles forced, his laughter hollow. Taryn, too, was struggling. Every congratulatory word, every well-wish for the newlyweds felt like a knife to his heart. Brief glances passed between Derek and Taryn throughout the evening, their shared secret casting a shadow over the day that should have been filled with nothing but joy. As the reception neared its end, Derek's unease grew more apparent. Leah noticed how distracted he seemed, as though his mind was somewhere far from the celebration. She brushed it off as fatigue from the day's events, but something didn't feel right. Derek had always been loving and attentive, but tonight he was distant, even detached. Every time she reached out to engage him, his responses were curt, his eyes wandering the room as if searching for something or someone. The truth was, Derek couldn't stop thinking about Taryn. The affair, which had ignited recently and unexpectedly, had thrown him into a turmoil he couldn't escape. The connection between them, once a simmering undercurrent, had erupted in the days leading up to the wedding, and now, on what should have been the happiest day of his life, Derek was overwhelmed with guilt. He wanted to be the husband Leah deserved, but his mind kept drifting back to Taryn. The weight of his double life was crushing him. As the night continued, Derek's anxiety escalated. He knew he needed to speak with Taryn to find some resolution to the chaos inside him, but this wasn't the place, not with Leah watching. Taryn, meanwhile, was wrestling with his own torment. The affair had been brief but intense, stirring emotions neither of them had expected. Seeing Derek with Leah was more painful than Taryn had imagined. Each smile, every touch between the newlyweds felt like a reminder of what he could never have. Taryn could see the conflict in Derek's eyes, the way he avoided looking at Leah too long, the way his gaze kept finding Taryn in the crowd. Their secret, once buried deep, now loomed large over them. As the evening wound down, Derek and Leah retired to their bridal suite. Leah was still caught up in the joy of the day, looking forward to a romantic night with her new husband. But Derek couldn't engage. The idea of being intimate with Leah felt wrong, as though he was betraying not just her, but also Taryn. He made excuses claiming exhaustion, saying the stress of the wedding had gotten to him. Leah, though disappointed, accepted his explanation. She kissed him goodnight, trying to be understanding, but a seed of doubt had been planted. Derek lay beside her, staring at the ceiling, his thoughts racing. He knew he was hurting Leah, that she deserved more than he could give. But he couldn't pretend. The guilt, the fear, the love he felt for Taryn, it was all too much. After hours of tossing and turning, Derek made a decision. He needed to talk to Taryn, to make sense of the mess they had created, to find some peace and figure out a way forward. Quietly, Derek slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Leah. The hotel hallways were dark and silent, the stillness amplifying the storm inside him as he walked toward Taryn's room. His heart pounded, not with anticipation, but with fear. He needed to talk to Taryn, to find some way to resolve the tension that had been building for weeks. As he approached the door, each step felt heavier, as though his body was trying to stop him. When he finally knocked, there was a long, agonizing pause before Taryn answered. Taryn stood in the doorway, his eyes filled with the same turmoil that Derek felt. Clad only in his underwear, the vulnerability of the moment was stark. They didn't need words, they both knew why Derek had come. Derek stepped inside, the door closing behind him with a finality that made his heart sink. They sat down, the air between them thick with unspoken emotions. Derek tried to start the conversation, to talk about what had happened, to find a way forward without destroying everything. But the words wouldn't come. The silence between them grew heavier, each man lost in his own thoughts, unable to break the tension. Finally, Derek spoke. He confessed his love for Taryn, admitting he couldn't let go, that he didn't know how to move on with Leah while his heart belonged to someone else. He asked Taryn the same question that had been haunting him: what were they supposed to do now? Before they could answer, the emotions they had been holding back all night erupted. In a moment of weakness, they gave in to the desire that had been simmering for weeks. What began as a desperate attempt to find some kind of release from the pain and confusion quickly escalated into a brief, intense affair. But as soon as it began, it was over, leaving them both with a deeper sense of guilt and dread. Derek pulled away, his thoughts racing back to Leah, to the life he had promised her just hours ago. The future that had once seemed certain now felt terrifyingly fragile. Taryn, too, was consumed by the weight of what they had done. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Meanwhile, Leah stirred in her sleep. She reached out for Derek, but her hand touched the cold, empty side of the bed. Jolted awake, panic set in. Derek wasn't there. She called his name, but there was no response. Her heart raced as she slipped on her robe and left the room, the quiet of the hotel only deepening her sense of dread. Following her intuition, Leah found herself standing outside Taryn's door. A knot formed in her stomach as she raised her hand to knock. The door opened slowly, revealing Taryn standing there in his underwear, surprise and guilt written across his face. Leah didn't need to see Derek to know what had happened. The truth that had been lurking in the shadows was now laid bare, devastating and undeniable. The man she had just married had betrayed her in the worst way possible. In that moment, Leah's world shattered. In a moment of uncontrollable rage, Leah's emotions overtook her entirely. She grabbed the nearest object, a heavy decorative lamp, and, with all her strength, swung it. The room plunged into stunned silence as the lamp struck Derek's head, sending him crashing to the floor. Blood pooled around him quickly, and for a fleeting moment, time seemed to freeze. Taryn rushed to Derek's side, hands trembling as he tried in vain to stop the bleeding. It was too late, the damage was done. Derek's lifeless eyes stared blankly, and the horror of what had just happened set in. Leah stood frozen as the reality of her actions slowly sank in, but her rage had not fully subsided. Overwhelmed by grief and madness, she turned to Taryn, blaming him for everything, for shattering the life she had just begun. Her pain, humiliation, and loss converged into a storm of fury, and before she could stop herself, she lashed out again, this time at Taryn. Caught off guard, he barely had time to react before Leah's attack landed. The room erupted into chaos as Leah's grief and rage consumed her. Her sobs mingled with Taryn's desperate pleas, but he knew what was coming. He could see the end, yet was powerless to stop it. A second blow struck Taryn down, his body collapsing beside Derek's. The blood of both men mingled on the cold, unforgiving floor. Then there was silence, a heavy, suffocating silence that echoed the finality of what had just transpired. Leah stood amid the carnage, gasping for breath, her mind struggling to process her actions. The lamp slipped from her trembling fingers, clattering to the floor beside the two lifeless bodies. The enormity of what she had done hit her with a physical force, her breath catching as the brutal reality took hold. In a frantic, desperate attempt to undo what couldn't be undone, Leah dropped to her knees beside Derek, shaking him as if he could somehow wake up and end this nightmare. But Derek didn't move. His vacant eyes stared at the ceiling, and the horror of her actions came crashing down in waves. Her cries grew more frantic as the realization struck there was no going back. The man she had loved, the man she had vowed to spend her life with, was gone, taken by her own hand in a moment of uncontrollable rage. Taryn lay beside him, his face frozen in an expression of shock and fear, his body just as still, just as cold. Leah's mind raced, her thoughts tumbling in chaotic, desperate search of a way out, a way to fix what she had done. She glanced around the room, her eyes wide with panic, seeking something, anything, to make this go away. But there was nothing. No escape. The blood on her hands, the walls, the floor, it was all too real, too final. In her despair, she tried to clean up, scrubbing at the blood with frantic hands. But it was no use. The blood wouldn't come off, and with each passing moment, the futility of her efforts became more apparent. The room, once a place of celebration, was now a horrific crime scene, a twisted remnant of love that had been shattered beyond recognition. Exhausted and broken, Leah collapsed on the floor between Derek and Taryn, her body shaking with uncontrollable sobs. The weight of her choices, the life she had destroyed, pressed down on her like a suffocating blanket. She was alone now, completely and utterly alone, with nothing but the echoes of her actions to keep her company. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the curtains, Leah knew there was no escaping the consequences of her actions. Whether to flee or surrender, she wasn't sure. But one thing was clear: her life, once full of promise and love, had been irreparably shattered in a single brutal night. A night meant to be filled with joy and celebration had become a tragedy of betrayal, violence, and death. The wedding, once a symbol of hope and unity, was now a scene of devastation. Its joy replaced by sorrow, its vows overshadowed by dark secrets. The empty venue, now a crime scene, echoed with the silence of lives lost and a future destroyed. Leah, the bride who had once dreamed of a life filled with love, sat alone, her tear-streaked face reflecting the profound loss and regret weighing heavily on her heart. This night, meant to mark the beginning of a lifelong union, instead became a stark reminder of how quickly love can turn to hatred, trust to betrayal, and joy to unimaginable sorrow. The wedding rings, once symbols of unity, lay discarded, broken representations of a marriage that was never truly meant to be. As we reflect on the events of this tragic tale, we are left grappling with the deeper questions it raises. Derek, Taryn, and Leah were all victims of societal pressures, of their hidden desires, of the secrets they thought they had to keep. But it was those very secrets that led to their destruction. What does this story say about love, loyalty, and identity in a world that often forces us to choose between our true selves and the roles we're expected to play? Leah, now isolated and alone, must face the consequences of her heartbreak-fueled rage. This is a story that forces us to confront the weight of secrets, the devastation of betrayal, and the irreparable damage caused when we live a life that's not true to who we are. In the end, the choices we make and the lives we lead define us, but at what cost? As the final curtain falls, we are left with one lingering question in a world where truth is often buried beneath layers of deception. What risks do we take by living a life that isn't true to ourselves? And when those secrets come to light, who bears the ultimate cost? A night of love turned to hatred, trust betrayed, and lives irrevocably changed. A story that urges us to reflect on our choices, our lives, and the people we choose to be. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell.